This is Timothy Sullivan. I'm on the board of directors of BioAustinCTX, and I'm also the CEO of a life science company in Austin called Zeteo Biomedical. This is the first in a new series of Lunch and Learns webinars that BioAustinCTX will be doing over the next year. I'm pleased to introduce Robert Phelps and Kathleen Hadaway from CyberCompass. They're coming to talk to us a bit about cybersecurity and cyber risk assessment and cyber resilience for small to large organizations. In the life science industry, this is particularly critical because our data is often a very high profile target for cyber hackers. I can tell you that in my experience as a CEO of a life science company here, we also have engaged in projects with the federal government. And for those life science organizations that are doing business with the federal government, if you haven't discovered it yet, what you'll find very shortly is that they have established some very significant cybersecurity standards in order to continue doing business with them. And so we're in the process right now of elevating our cybersecurity standards in order to be compliant with that. We're doing that through through an engagement with CyberCompass. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Robert and Kathleen. I'll let them provide introductions for themselves and carry on. Thanks. And thanks for your participation today.
I'll go first because Robert, you're going to hear more from him. I'm Kathleen Hadaway. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer, and our goal with today is to really make this interactive for you as a lunch and learn, so you gain something about it. If you don't mind, I want to remind everybody that we have our little chat feature there, so make sure to look down at the bottom and use it. It's a great way for us to know what you're thinking, and we can really hear from you and understand and help address anything that's going on in your lives around cybersecurity and compliance. I know it's your favorite thing in the world right now. But we want to make sure we really make this informative and engaging, and that's our goals. So please use your chat. We also are going to have some polling questions throughout this presentation. So hopefully all of y'all are familiar with polling in Zoom, but we really do want you to help participate. It gives us a better idea, and Robert is brilliant at this. You'll hear more. We can pivot and really start addressing something that's really custom to you, so you can get a lot more out of this. Because if you have a question, probably the other 10 or 12 people joining us have the same one. So want to make sure that, engaging and informative is what we're trying to do today. So with that, I'm going to let, I'll go ahead and introduce Robert a little bit, and then he can finish out. Robert is the CEO of CyberCompass. He is, well, I'll be nice, but anyway, he is.
Yeah, skip number 2. Okay.
At really understanding the things that go on in technology, which we know is complex and chaotic, as well as finding really practical approaches that really end up moving businesses to become much more cyber resilient. We'll talk about that, so they can survive and thrive. He has a wealth of information. He takes things and breaks it down very simple so everybody can understand. If we catch him using an acronym, I will hit them for you. So he won't, but he usually does not. But the whole idea is he will take things and break it down and make it very simple and practical for people to understand. He has a diverse background. He has worked for a lot of companies you may have heard of, from IBM to global efforts across. So he has a wide range of experience and depth. Probably the one thing you need to know is he loves Snickers. We'll talk about that. And to him, that is the power bar. And we limit him on occasions. You'll see that why. Thank goodness he is not a coffee drinker, because we would be in deep trouble. And again, you will hear him. He is very passionate about, if there's something we can automate, let's do it and start saving people money, time, frustrations, really. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Robert.
Thank you, Kathleen. And you're probably wondering why we're doing polls, but we want you to chat your favorite candy to start this thing off. And this has turned out to be a pretty funny thing, not to get off track on a tangent here, but some lady named Kathleen said about a year ago, we should start asking our clients when we onboard them, what's their favorite candy. And this has become the most amazing opening session and thing with our clients. And it's amazing how fast it opens up the conversations and team and everybody, and what you find out for candies, and the candies you didn't even know existed. So, it's one of those learning experiences. Kathy's driving, so you may hear me ask her to go next, but she did tell me she was just going to go next no matter what on some of these if I go too long. So.
Almond Joy, Butterfinger. Oh, it's the new favorite candy extraterrestrial. Of course, Timothy said that.
Chance to answer.
I forgot you're doing a poll.
I'm with you, Nancy. Dark chocolate, anything's my fave.
That's a really common answer among people is chocolate, anything. It's pretty common.
Dark chocolate. There's a difference, Robert.
I like dark chocolate. I was actually impressed that you guys found a picture of a Take 5. So dark chocolate.
What is Australian strawberry licorice? Amazing. German milk chocolate. I do like German milk chocolate. Good clarification.
Australian strawberry licorice actually still contains licorice root in it. So it's got a lot of it's made with a starch and strawberries, and I mean, it's all real stuff. So it's just a little chewier, and it's got a lot more flavor to it than, like Twizzlers or anything like that. So
cool. Now I have a reason to go to Australia. I've been looking for one. Thank you.
All right. So did you have a visual winner, Kathleen or Kathy, you wanted to share that, was it just chocolate in general as everybody?
No, the Australian strawberry licorice is the winner. No one, I've never heard that one. Boop, boop. But everybody's a winner with candy. Okay.
All right. Well, I will try to get going on this and go through it fast enough. We want to leave time for you to have questions and see if we can answer those for you. It's awesome that Kathleen went ahead and told you I'm brilliant. So this way I can be guaranteed of a failure somewhere along the way. Either Zoom hangs up or I don't know the answer to something. So I love it. A little about CyberCompass. We don't want to spend a lot of time on us. We really want to talk about compliance, cybersecurity, cyber resilience. But CyberCompass is built around the idea of navigating our clients to cyber resilience. So you might go, wait a minute, you're a compliance company or a cybersecurity company. The goal is actually cyber resilience, and we're going to get into that more. And it's doing it across the ecosystem. And we run into almost every client we work with. The problem is the complexity, the chaos, the change, the uncertainty. And how do you go do this? And then when they go out to get help to do it, it's very expensive. People still do it with paper and spreadsheets. And we do it we've got expertise across the board, including CIOs. And we have a tool that speeds the process up. So we'll go into that more. So we're not a technology solution if you haven't figured that out. So if you are thinking that we're a cybersecurity technology, we don't have any kind of tools like that. We're agnostic about those tools. What we are is a cybersecurity or a cyber team that comes in, a virtual team. And then, as I mentioned, CyberCompass is a platform, a cloud-based platform that manages all of this for you. So we are focused on cyber risk. We don't do risk management. We do cyber risk management. And we do that as a third-party vendor. So a little bit about what we're covering today. The problem is basically protecting data. We're going to talk a little bit about where the world is in a piecemeal castle defense thinking, think technology, and we'll get into this a little bit more in depth. And then it's what you want to move to is you've got to think across across the ecosystem. It's people, processes, technology, and vendors. And as Timothy mentioned earlier about the Department of Defense, they're coming in with CMMC, and it's basically saying you've got to go all the way down the vendor chain to anybody that touches sensitive data. And you need to have proof they're actually protecting it. So it's the world's changing. Federal government's doing it, state governments are doing it, and we're really seeing a lot out of the corporate America pushing on this. So the new cyber world order, it's been this trust you. You could go do a self-assessment or check the box and think of your cybersecurity insurance. Now they're saying, no, we want to see proof of this. We want to know you're doing this. We want to know how you're protecting the data. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, the pain points, there's a lot of confusion around this, trying to keep up. HIPAA alone, just take healthcare. HIPAA is a 900 and something page regulation. It's a little hard to get your head wrapped around that, even if you go find some really good summaries and guides that have been built for it. So there's the complexity. It's very costly usually to try to go off and do this alone. We have companies that have been working on it for 2 years in self-assessment, and then they realize we're really not addressing it. And they haven't taken the approach of you got to start at the strategy level across the company and then drive it to operations. And then the solution really that we bring to the table is a roadmap. So we're going to build a data protection into your culture and manage your cyber risk. So we're building a formal cybersecurity and compliance program that's implemented down to the operations level. We are going to ask you to stay to the end. We will give you, show you access to a mini assessment so you can actually go figure out where you stand in cyber risk. And then there's some offers that we've got for the people on the call today on the webinar. I think Timothy probably mentioned some of this earlier. Life sciences is #2 in highest cyber risk for the next 5 years in a study. #1 is high-tech industry, and life sciences is a close second. $642 billion is likely to be lost by the industry. And if you really think about it, life sciences probably falls underneath high-tech a little bit too. So maybe you want to think of the fact that you're #1 and #2. I would like to point out what Tom Brady is saying here. The most important thing on the slide is not that if you put 642 into perspective, that's 128 years of his contract. It's that he likes Snickers. So we can go on to the next one. So you might ask, why is life science a target of the hackers? And I don't know if everyone understands this, but probably 3 years ago, the top hacker organization in the world made $400 million a year, and the hackers were in a 4-story building in Europe. So Eastern Bloc, but they were acting like they were just normal workers. So, we got this image from Hollywood that these guys are in dark apartments or buildings somewhere, hiding out. They've gotten smart enough to figure out that it's easier if they'll just put them in a normal office building and no one can figure out where they are that way. But why are you top target is back to there's a very high interest with the hackers because you've got money to pay is what they believe. Again, Timothy sort of touched on this. Your data is really worth a lot of money. So then there's 2 reasons. PHI is very valuable and your intellectual property is being sought. And then you've got a reliance on third parties usually. So that opens up vulnerabilities. And then there's a lot of mergers and acquisitions going on in this industry. So that also creates an opening for hackers. They are well aware that if you merge 2 or 3 companies together, the IT systems suffer initially. And there's usually some openings there to get into them. So these guys they're pretty intelligent about what's going on in the world and the business and how to make this work. And then small businesses are actually a high target. A lot of people think that because I'm a small business, no one's going to pay attention to me. The discovery of you and whether you have an opening is often done automatically. So you get put in a database if you've got a potential vulnerability they can exploit. So we see this a lot where people are safeguarding their pennies, but they're risking dollars. And in the Texas, are you stepping over $1 for a shiny dime? You got to get focused on what's important here. And the problem around this is 70% of people just don't even know, well, 70% of people aren't prepared for this. 14% of the small companies believe they're prepared. I would argue 14% is high from what we've seen. And then I sort of laugh at this. 16% probably just don't know what's going on. If you notice, there's that amount missing. But the real result out of this not being prepared is 60% of these small businesses aren't going to make it. Within 6 months of a major breach, they're done. They're going to go under. And some of that's because they don't have cybersecurity insurance to help them make it through it. Some of them is they lost a big client because of it. I mean, there's multiple reasons, but we see this where they're just going to go out of business. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but we're trying to move the regulations, the standards, and company like ourselves, we're the goal is to move companies from thinking about this tassel defense and a piecemeal approach to a complete strategic business ecosystem or holistic approach. You got to get your people, processes, technology, and vendors all involved in the cybersecurity and cyber risk management, and work on it. You know, you got to change it all the way down to the operating procedures. And if you don't do that, you haven't really addressed the cybersecurity issues. So a little humor, you know, IT guys, and I've been a CIO, I've been a CISO. You know, we're over here on the right. You know, we're on the left here, data security on the right side. The wording there. You know, we've got it all figured out. We got the firewalls in place. We've encrypted everything. It's protected. There's nothing can happen. And then an employee shows up, and it all goes out the window because they only have to make one mistake, do one thing, and you're done. You've now had a major breach. I don't know if there's any humor to it, actually. It's just sad. So piecemealing, everybody's probably familiar with this. You know, in our case, I would say it's two. You know, number two is a better description of what we're talking about. Is, you know, they do it in fragments, or they're just going and doing one thing at a time, when in fact they need to step back and build a strategy and get everybody involved across the organization. That's one thing we don't have in the slide deck, but it's important is executive sponsorship. CMMC actually requires that. So it's important that management understands we need to do this across the board. So there's a little bit more detail about it, and we're going to share the deck with you afterwards. So you don't need to be taking screenshots or worrying about it. We'll send this out. But you know, the piecemeal effect basically is IT is working on this. The rest of the company thinks IT is taking care of it. They're trying to build a moat and protect all the data and systems. They're focused on IT solutions. But the problem is they've left out a lot of areas that are important. And to give you an idea, humans are the cause of 67% of breaches. So you really have to go educate, train the users to, you know, phishing training, things like that, to really protect and secure the data. And the bottom is cyber resilience. So, you know, how do you get to cyber resilience? You actually go do assessments, you gather that information across the people, you build out the processes, the technology, and the vendors by applying all that information that you learned and what needs to be done. This is a little bit of a slide. I'm not going to go through all of it, but we just wanted to give you an idea. We hear a lot of these words, the three major things: framework, standards, regulations, and controls, used interchangeably, which is okay. But we felt it's important to understand the framework is the basis of this thing. It's the guidelines and best practices. What are we supposed to be doing? And there's multiple ones of them out there. NIST CSF is who you hear of most of. NIST is National Institute of Standards and Technology, cybersecurity framework. CIS is Center for Internet Security, and ISO is the International Standards Organization. So these are all these basic frameworks this is how you protect the data. Most of these are focused on IT. The standards and regulations is where you begin to put measurements around that and performance. So you need the policy and the procedures. So what are the procedures to do this? What are the limiters on these things? And you'll see the keyword bingo expands rapidly here, but this is where they start taking the framework and they build out around, well, how do you protect, for example, in HIPAA, PHI, GDPR is personal data. So, you know, the standards and regulations are where you begin to build this thing out to be a usable approach. And the controls is really defining, well, what's in this standard or regulation? What do I have to meet to get there and become compliant? And you'll see a lot of people go focus on compliance. A lot of people are going to go piecemeal focus on cybersecurity. The goal is to put together a formal cybersecurity and compliance program where they're really one. And what you wind up with at that point is a cyber risk management plan or program across your company. A little bit on that, I added in the confidentiality, integrity, and availability in there. Almost all of the, sorry about that, Kathy, almost all of the standards talk about data in this sense. So the confidentiality is protecting it because of what's in it. The integrity is you don't want it to get corrupted because that could cause mass problems. So think of a operating room, somebody on the surgery table. And the same with availability. I need it available now if I'm in an emergency room. But those are common across most standards. So supply chains we talked about a little bit, but we really want to point this out. You know, the big companies, especially the Fortune 500, probably the Fortune 5000 now, we're seeing are basically saying, are our vendors protecting our data? And they are now coming to these vendors and saying, you need to fill out this questionnaire. And I think the largest one we've done is 472 questions. We've had clients that various states have come to them, various arms of the federal government have come to them, and various Fortune 500 companies have come to them and said, we want this filled out, and we want you to send us a couple of your policy and procedures, and we want to see the results of your pen testing. So everybody's getting into at least spot checking proof that you're doing this.
And also, I just want to add to that, what we're seeing in that is people won't renew the contract with the supplier unless they have the attestation and certification. So now a lot of contracts and renewals are coming up at risk. So it's only a matter of time before almost everybody will be asked for this in order to participate, and especially in the government contracts. We're seeing that in big time, and also with the larger corporations.
Right. Yeah. We're also seeing insurance. So we have several clients that when their insurance came up, they had not yet, even though we've done an assessment, we're working on remediating things with them. They didn't have multi-factor authentication in place. They didn't have off-site pull-based backups, and they were denied their cybersecurity renewal on their insurance. So the company's basically saying, you don't have these, they're required. We're not going to insure you if you don't have them. So we're also seeing that happen in the insurance industry. So, how do you get there? How do you get to, how do you get through this chaos and complexity and the costly charges and the changes that are occurring all the time? And the simple answer is cyber resilience. And you still may go, well, wait, what's cyber resilience? So we're trying to give you a definition here of, it's really, I think of it to a certain extent, cyber resilience moves you over into business continuity. So it's not just about cybersecurity. It's not just about the compliance play in this whole thing. It's how do I keep this business running if I take a major hit? So think of a hacking event as a disaster that you've got to make it through. And it's really changing the mindset around that. So it's the ability to anticipate this, withstand this, recover from it, and move on. So, you're going to go through some really adverse situations and stresses here. You need to be prepared for it. You need to have an incident response plan in place. And this is coming out of NIST, by the way. So everybody's moving towards it. They're all beginning to figure this out. And I hate to do this publicly, but I have to give Kathleen credit. Kathleen, when did you come up with cyber resilience for us in marketing? About 4 years ago? And it really wasn't out yet. It was really interesting. She was doing research.
Thank you, pandemic.
Yeah, and we actually, our compliance officer put a pandemic plan in probably 4 years ago. So I try to ask people not to blame us for causing a pandemic, because we actually put a pandemic plan on our plate. But anyway, all right, next slide. Thanks. So polling question for you guys. This is just basically, where do you think you are in cyber resilience in your organization? So level 1 through 5. It looks like Kathy's popped up you can answer on there.
Yeah, the poll itself is anonymous. So if you are worried about answering and then we would know who is where, it's completely anonymous. So that's why we're doing the polling instead of the chat. Although if you'd like to add it in the chat, that's fine as well.
Yeah, and I would add too, as we've gone through and done a lot of clients at this point, it's interesting. To give you an example of the self-assessment and moving forward to a formal, we just did a client that did they've been doing self-assessments for large corporations in the Department of Defense, and they were scoring themselves at about 90% compliant. We went through, did the exact same assessment. It's called a NIST 171. And they scored a 35, and they're like, well, wait a minute. And we're like, well, you were answering yes to things because you felt like you were sort of doing them, and sort of doesn't get a pass. So you have to change to realize, okay, if I'm not feeling comfortable and I don't think I can recover and continue, you can answer yes to this thing. So it's been interesting watching, how people were utilizing this, and it brings backed why the large corporations are basically saying self-assessments don't work anymore. So Kathy, you got like 9 or so, it looks like, almost out of 10.
I just said a whole bunch of stuff, but I was muted. So yeah, we have 11 out of 15 who've answered, which is great. And I moved the slide ahead if you want to just start talking about the next steps, and I'll end this poll in just a minute.
Well,
Leaving the poll.
we can
Sorry,
end
Anna.
it. End it. We'll put the results up.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think we're doing good on time.
Wow. So that's really awesome.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's why I was sort of waiting to see if we finished on it. What's interesting is, in general, this is really rough order of scoring. I would tell you that over the years we've been doing this, about 7 years now, HIPAA healthcare is the lowest. They come in somewhere around 30% almost always. General business, and that takes in, you know, let's say non-financial, non-software, non-scientific. General business comes in somewhere in the 40 to 50. You get into technical, scientific, they begin to come in. They're scoring on compliance and cybersecurity, and where they stand is somewhere in the 50 to 60, 65. You get into the what I'd call software, scientific. I would probably put life sciences, you know, biotech into this arena. It jumps up into the 65 to 80% range. So it's really interesting that, you know, the ones of us that grew up in the high-tech industry, the bio industry, the science industry, we've all been trained. This has all been beaten into our head. You're supposed to document what you're doing. You're supposed to protect what you're doing. And so you do a pretty good job. You know, it's really interesting in watching that across the industries. And then I could talk about construction and manufacturing, but we don't have time for those issues. So it's amazing that, you know, you can go in and they have computer controlled manufacturing, and there's like nothing. Like you're like, you can walk in and steal it, and you can log in and steal it. This is crazy. So, so a little bit different view of this. You know, back to taking the proactive steps to get to cyber resilience. You start off with identifying the risk. That's the assessment. The transform the culture is education. Education flows in with documenting the processes. So there's a lot of education actually comes from steps 1, 2, and 3. So when you do the assessment, you drastically see an education in management, realizing, whoa, we're really missing a lot in this area. And then in the document process, you want the managers to all be aware of the policy and procedures that apply to them, and then drive that down into the staff, the working staff that it applies to, whoever's touching sensitive data. And then, of course, harden technology I talked about. That's what we all think about in cybersecurity, is how do I harden the technology? How do I build this moat around the shop? And then the new thing that's really picking up this year, started probably about 2 years, but it's drastically picked up this year, is you got to verify the vendors and then continue the process. So always monitor and repeat anytime you make major changes or on a regular basis. So this is going into it in more detail. So step 1 is identify the risk, or it's a risk assessment. I mentioned to you about the self-assessments being an issue. So they've all really started pushing that if you don't have a third-party security risk assessment performed, we're not going to count it as valid. Depends on your industry, depends on the regulations, but we're seeing a lot more of that. And as I mentioned, the goal is really business continuity. What they want is, if everybody understands and everybody pretty much accepts you're going to get breached at some point, or you're at least going to have an incident at some point. Breach means you lost data, lost, corrupted, or stolen data. But the goal is business continuity, which is cyber resilience. How do you build this so the company keeps right on running? Which is back to our 4 things again: people, processes, technology, and vendors. You got to do it across the entire system or it doesn't work. And I've already mentioned the bottom basically, so we can go on, but it's, you know, the castle effect is IT's in charge, IT's doing it all, and they're taking care of it. And that's just not true. And it's nothing against IT. What's interesting is when we initially go into a lot of companies, IT is somewhat defensive, but they quickly realize, oh, wait, you're going to make everybody start doing this? And then they're like all over it. They're just like, yes, let's get on with this. So it turns out very, very beneficial to IT. Next one,
Well, Robert,
educate
you
the-
should also talk too about the MSPs, because I don't know how many folks have MSPs or outsourcing their IT.
Yeah,
But
that's a
how
good
they
point.
are really not doing the technology assessments that you think they are, because you assume they have it. So you might want to speak to that a little bit.
No, that's a good point, Kathleen. Thanks. So we didn't do a poll on this, but it is interesting how many of you may have an MSP, or you may have a hired person coming in and taking care of your systems because you have minimal systems. I know some of you are running into a development or / lab environment, and everybody's working remotely. But MSPs in general, what we find is the companies think, well, my MSP takes care of this. And it's like, no, your MSP keeps your systems up and running. And MSSP is cybersecurity oriented. And sometimes some MSPs will do some MSSP work. Managed service provider, managed security service providers are the two acronyms. I'll try to say that before Kathleen gets on me about just yakking about MSP and MSSP. But the MSP is not going to do these bullets that are listed below in general. If you go in and ask an MSP, do you have the devices and data inventory? They're like, no. Do you have a data flow map of where all this sensitive data is? No. Have you performed penetration testing? Have you done the internal and external penetration testing? If they've got web applications facing the internet, have they done that? And normally an MSP will not do any of these things, whereas an MSSP will be well aware of these things, and that's what they're doing for you. And we offer most of these services in our assessment services. So when we come in and do a full service, we call it Commander Package Virtual CISO assessment and compliance, building out a program. We have these offerings in here. But it's important to understand that, are these being done, or do you need to go have them done? Now, the other problem with having an MSP do it is, it's actually a self-assessment. And CMMC actually says the MSP or the IT department cannot run these things against themselves. You actually have to go get a third-party risk management firm. So it's interesting that you should be running these in operations on a regular basis, but for certification or for compliance, you want a third party to check you. And we just ran a company that they're running an internal, they run an internal penetration vulnerability scan all the time. We ran it against it, and we're like, it's misconfigured. You need to fix these things. So that's why these regulations are saying we need a third party to look at it to sort of check everything.
Right. It's a really positive check and balance thing that we find a lot of people are missing out. So basically, people sleep better at night knowing that, yes, those things are happening. So
we're moving into the CPA world. There's going to be vertical and horizontal checks. So educate the people. In general, simplifying this is awareness training, phishing. You need the policy and procedures, as I talked about. They're in the next step 3, but you want to educate on those. And then, of course, with COVID, it drove a massive movement to the remote workforce. You need to address that. So for example, we went and built a tool inside CyberCompass to go do a risk assessment or a small assessment on the home user, and actually does a firewall test and a speed test on their internet connectivity. So important to know, where is our remote workforce, and have we got them secure?
And to that point, also, we know a lot of people are outsourcing contractors. You've got to include them in on this. That's why we really talk about your workforce, because it's not just employees, but you have to broaden that to think about your contractors too.
Yeah, anybody that can access your sensitive data. So step 3 is the document processes. So, you've got to go put these, in general, they're policy and procedures. We break them down to strategic plans and policy and procedures. The risk management plan actually is a written document, but it's also, we have it built into our tool. It is the project management of prioritized vulnerabilities. So everything that has been identified in the assessment step, where we identify, is now in here so that you can log in and use the tool and go through and resolve all these issues or address them and mitigate the risk. So this is all part of getting it all documented. You want to build a body of evidence, basically. Strategic plans, we have, I think, about 12 now. IT security plan, incident response plan, disaster recovery plan. There's a pandemic plan, workforce security plan. And then policy and procedures, we think of those more as your standard operating procedures. So think of SOPs that have cybersecurity built into them. So how are you going to operate? You have to operate and realize you've got to be covering these cybersecurity things in compliance. Step 4, I've said this over and over. You know, this is what we all think about. Hardened technology is what you think of to me as cybersecurity. And it's what we see as the piecemeal part where everybody's thrown it over into IT's department and said, you go take care of this and we'll all be good. But it does start out with focusing on protecting the data. It's amazing how many times we go in and IT's really not focused on protecting the data. They're just trying to keep the systems up and running and keeping the network secure. And it's like, okay, there's more to protecting the data than that. And you know, there's obviously you need to encrypt it, but you need to know where's it going out? Where's it exfiltrating out of your company? Are you tracking that? Do you know about that? Access control is huge, obviously, but this is back to, if you remember in the bullet list, you need to go find all your data and all of your assets so you know how to monitor everything and know where it's at and know what to protect. Excuse me. And Kathy, we can move on. There's other things in here that we all think about in IT, but
one thing I say, by doing the risk assessment, you find out a lot of people are buying a lot of technology they don't really need. We find that a lot with clients because they haven't really assessed the data situation. And so they just, oh, that's the shiny new object, and they go buy it. And we find a lot of people say, you know, there's a better way to get what you want it done in a different format. So just throwing that out because we've seen that a couple of times. So a lot of people think, oh, if I just buy this new shiny new thing technology, it's going to solve problems. We find like, well, it didn't even really address your data. So that's,
yeah, we see that a lot too. This is sort of a warning against our own technology, you know, partners and people. And we do not resell software or hardware. As I mentioned earlier, we're agnostic towards that. But in the last year, I would say there's been a massive increase in hardware and software cybersecurity vendors coming in and saying, oh, if you'll buy our SIM system, you'll be CMMC or HIPAA or whatever compliant. It's false. Anytime anybody says that, just stop. There's something wrong, because it's not a one thing fixes it all. You know, this is a program. This is a cybersecurity and compliance program, and it's going to take you these steps to go across the entire organization. So, you know, it's a 6 steps and it's across everything. So anytime somebody comes in and tells you if you'll buy this solution, it's all done, that's just the wrong track. That's not the way to go. So step 5, verify the vendors. This is making sure you know the vendors are doing what they should be doing and they are protecting the data for you. So, you know, you got to go communicate your requirements to them, obviously. You need a signed agreement. So you need to put this, you know, legal liability and risk management. And then you want proof of cyber compliance. So there needs to be some way for them to prove that. There are multiple ways to go about this. They can send you a third-party risk management or third-party risk assessment with some proof of some of the things that have been accomplished in there. You can ask for those, so that way they can't just send you what they have and they've only got 3 policy and procedures. And then what we're seeing more and more of is, especially out of the Fortune 5000, is they're basically saying, we want to make sure you've got a cybersecurity policy in place that makes sense for the size company and what you're doing for us. So more and more requirements coming down on people. And then step 6 is the simple way, I guess, to say is rinse and repeat. But you need to monitor everything. So it's not just rinse and repeat the whole process, but it is monitoring your data flow, knowing about the vulnerabilities and people accessing the system. So this is why they talk about you have to have log management in here. You have to have alerts going on. And believe it or not, you don't have to go buy software to do that. Most of the operating systems and tools out there, you can turn on logging, you can turn on alerts. You're not looking for alert on everything. You're looking for alerts on things that you don't want to be occurring. You need to track. You need to stay on top of what's going on with new vulnerabilities always hitting us in all the different softwares and operating systems, and being aware of new cybersecurity requirements and new regulatory. So an example is HIPAA just came out this year, and I've had a lot of people call me and say, well, HIPAA's put out new requirements. It's like, no, there's information blocking is a new requirement that went into a final rule. HIPAA has not put in their final rule that somewhat relates to that. Now, if you're under HIPAA compliance, you still need to go take into account the info blocking final rule that came out of the federal government. But it's one of those, you need to be aware of that. Like it really didn't have to do directly with HIPAA. It had to do with the info blocking that was going on for patient data. So I think the federal government did a misservice because they didn't label it well and they didn't drive it down through the HIPAA path real well. But that's an example of things are changing.
One really important about documenting risk is that too, we're also seeing a lot more requirements coming from leadership, and more importantly, your board of directors, especially anything, is that they want to see, are you talking and regularly meeting about your cyber risk? So it's a good time to start to, report out what you're doing so people can see, yes, we are managing. That's why it's such an important step. That's part of getting your organization start to realize it goes across the whole organization and getting that executive buy-in.
Okay, I just launched this poll, but while people are answering it, Robert, Scott asked you to talk to the challenges of security and compliance, if any, when it's related to external services such as Slack, LinkedIn, Calendly, and other web-based services. So maybe you can talk about that while people are answering the poll.
Yeah, Scott, that's a good question. And there is no one perfect answer. Many of these services now are secure. They, I'll pick Dropbox for a second. If you backed up, Dropbox was encrypted from the beginning, if I remember right, but it wasn't until I don't even remember when they started. It's been a long time, but anyway, 3 or 4 years ago, they got that to the point of where they could pass and believe they were HIPAA compliant. Now, there's no certification for HIPAA, but they felt like we've improved this. We're liably responsible and we can protect your data. We used to use Slack. We actually stopped because of this issue. But now I believe Slack is back where they're protecting the data. They've got encryption and protection built into it, and they're doing a good job. Zoom, we all know about, had all kinds of issues when it exploded last spring, I guess. And they've addressed those. So I can't answer on every single one of them, but I would tell you, you want to go check that. You want to go see if they've got a BAA, Business Associates Agreement for HIPAA, or they've got some kind of cybersecurity or security clause or agreement in their end users agreement. They've got whatever agreement that company or that service is using. So you can look at that and usually find out fairly easily, is this thing secure or not? I mean, you can go Google it usually, and you'll find a good write-up, and it'll be by somebody reputable. Sometimes they're included in research by big organizations that are looking at these things. But it is a good question, and I would tell you to be careful about that. LinkedIn, I look at a little different. In the LinkedIn sense, you need a policy that says, do not go publish any sensitive data on any social media site, period. It doesn't matter who it is or what it is. And then that's back to Slack. You've always got
policy and procedures.
Yeah, back to, you need policy and procedures. And another thing, a lot of people don't understand the value of the policy and procedure. So a policy and procedure is corporate law. And you might go, well, so what? Well, if you go to court because of a breach and you have no internal corporate law, then they're going to set the law for you, right? They're going to apply it onto your company. If you've written it down and you say, this is what we're doing, then you've now said, this is what we approach, this is what we teach, this is what we train. Now you've driven that over to the employee's liability, or you've at least said, we're trying to do this, we had a mistake. And it drastically changes, like HIPAA makes drastic changes in their fines based on those kind of things. No policy and procedures, here's your $50,000 to start. Now let's talk about what you should have been doing, and we'll find you more. If you got the policy and procedures, they're not going to do an initial fine on you. So that's an example of why is it important to have these things in place. Timothy, I see you popped one, had a chat, addressing cybersecurity with an organization. Okay, so that you're making a statement, but yes. Quality management system's a good example of, and I think that sort of falls back. I don't know, Timothy, you're welcome to join into this discussion, but the quality management systems, the software, when you're doing proper software development, testing, and rollouts, we all start putting those things in place that actually address some of these issues. Now, we may not be focused on cybersecurity, but you wind up catching some of it when you do those kind of things.
Yeah, this is Timothy. I can tell you that also the the challenge in this is that it requires a non-trivial investment of time, and money, to bring this, especially to initiate it and bring it online, just like a quality management system requires. And we've recently engaged with the DoD on a project, and the requirements, the cybersecurity requirements that were handed down as part of their standard flow down terms and conditions. And this is true whether you're doing business directly with the federal government, doesn't matter what agency it is, or if you're doing it through, say, a prime contractor. They flow down the new cybersecurity requirements to everybody that essentially is receiving any type of compensation. And one of those key requirements is that if you have an incident, there's mandatory disclosure with really substantial penalties, for first of all, not being compliant, but moreover, not disclosing, if there's a breach event that occurs when you're under these contracts. It was, we knew it was coming, but, we had to dig into the details of it as part of our contracting process, and it was eye-opening.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're seeing come out of the federal government is, and this starts with the Department of Defense and the CMMC standard, which is a cybersecurity maturity model certification. They're expecting all mid-sized companies, really, they're expecting 150,000 vendors to become level 3, which is pretty significant change. But what's really different about it compared to before, there's two things. It's got to go across the organization now. It can't just be IT and technology. And the policy and procedures have to be customized and match up to how you operate. And they have to be detailed. So you can't go in and say, we have a policy for access control, and we require every employee or every workforce person to have access. It gets, and then the procedures would, used to, you might say the procedure is everybody has to have a 12-character password, and they have to refresh every 180 days. Now it's everything about access control. You need all the details of how you do it and what you're using for tools to do, access control, multi-factor authentication, things like that. So they've really changed the level of intensity that they're expecting. They're no longer putting up with this. I wrote a document, here it is, let's all go on and do something else. They're all like, that's not valid. We're going to verify it's not valid, or we're going to verify that you're really doing what you said in the policy and procedure. So big changes coming. And a note to add to that is, yes, this is in Department of Defense, and you might say, well, we don't do any Department of Defense things. They're already talking about this moving across over into the healthcare. They're talking about it moving over into the SEC finance. FTC has been looking at this because of IoT, FCC. So, I mean, everybody they're trying to, I think they're all watching DoD for the next year or two, and they're going to do one of these rapid turnarounds of saying, everybody's got to do CMMC now for government contracts.
All right, I don't know if you want to talk to the results, but we have about 10 minutes, and I know you have a little bit more that you want to talk after the questions. Please feel free to put any more questions into the chat, or if you just want to unmute yourself and ask a question out loud, that's also perfectly fine. We'd love to have some more questions and interaction on that regard.
Yeah, any questions from anyone? Any acronyms I said that I did not explain, just go ahead and throw me under the bus with Kathleen and, point out the fact that I came back and explained CMMC. Okay?
Like we gotta go to the poll. It seems like we got people who are doing some testing and scanning. We've seen people, it looks like great people are doing some training.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so are y'all also supporting clients with FDA 510K submissions where you're having to address cybersecurity in your 510K submissions?
We haven't done that, but we could look at it for you. And the reason is it's probably what they're requesting is probably covered by like CIS 20 or ISO 27001. So, and I know you may look at that and go, I don't see anything like that. I don't see those keywords or those acronyms. I don't know if you were on, before. I think you were from the beginning,
Yeah.
but remember the page with all the, where we did the frameworks.
Right.
So that's another really good question to point out, is like, you may be off doing something else. And we've had this, clients get a request in and it's 472 questions and they literally freak out. They're like, I can't answer all this stuff. I'm like, calm down. It's just 3 put together. And the company was so lazy, they just plugged 3 standards together and then they didn't remove duplicate questions. And we have the ability, literally, there are 3 or 4 of us, probably more, that can go through that. Once we do an assessment for you, say in CIS 20, that's a cybersecurity framework assessment, then we can just go through the 472 questions and answer them fairly quickly, right? Now, when I say fairly quickly, it would take you 16 hours. We can do it in 6 hours, but we get the answer. We know the answers. We can write up what you're doing and what level you're doing. So that's usually how we go look at those things, right? We'd have to just look at it with you. And some of them we just have to turn down. We're like, no, it's very specific. It's something they're doing.
I'll give it one. We had a call, great case study though, to show how that's in action. We had a call from a post-production video crew in California. They called us on Thursday, said, hey, we have an auditor walking in the door for real on Tuesday for this TPN, which we'd never heard of. And so we were screwing around, Robert and I we had to learn out. It's called Trusted Partner Network. It was put together by Sony and all the major companies, now that they wanted them to show proof of compliance around their security, because the big Sony breach had happened, if you recall that, a couple of years ago. Anyway, short story short, we got the list of what the auditor was looking for. It was exactly NIST 171. I mean, it was just a duplicate of it, but they had called it TPN then. So, there's a lot of that going on. But again, it goes back to everybody really crux around those frameworks. So.
Yeah, so we would be happy. I'd have to go look at 510K and see what they're asking you and see what plugs in underneath.
Yeah, it's really, you have to submit a risk assessment and a cybersecurity mitigation plan.
Yeah, that's normally what we see. I don't know how many of you are familiar with GLBA, Graham-Leland-Bailey Act. It's the same way. It doesn't have any, people are like, I have to comply to GLBA. And you're like, there's no compliance. There's no definitions. They didn't put controls in it. So you're like, you can't. And so what's expected there is you have to go do another assessment and pass that back up. So sometimes you can get away with doing a 20-question GLBA response, but the companies that understand come back and go, no, we meant like a real cybersecurity risk assessment. Yeah. So yeah, we see that quite often where another example is New York DFS. So New York Department of Financial Services 2 years ago came out with Reg 500. You go through and you think, oh, it's only 55 questions. This will be awesome. You get to question 55. Have you done a complete third-party cyber risk management assessment such as CIS 20? And you're going, wow, okay, there was 55 questions and now I get another 120 questions. Awesome. So we've seen that. There's several standards that do the same thing, right? You get down to the bottom and then CCPA is the same way. California Consumer Protection Act. Last question.
Came out with a new guidance today that included what's included in their cyber and with the submission. So just FYI.
Yeah, no, it's always right. So
yeah, I think just truth, right? I've been an advisor with Third Rock for a number of years, and one of the things the story that Kathleen told, it's anything, especially if it's a government agency, but even with Sony, right? Basically, it turned out to be go back to the NIST standard. But if you're dealing with FDA, DOE, DOD, any of the government agencies, they're going to go back to one of those NIST standards, which are all actually very similar too. So just know
Don't
that.
be afraid.
Right. So even if it has some different name or whatever, the NIST framework is the sort of the bedrock of all of them. So I had just a comment too. Looking at our proactive basics, these poll results compared to our earlier poll results, where we were all feeling pretty confident, right? We were kind of in the space of low risk of breach and et cetera, et cetera. But notice that maybe we don't have the policies and procedures, and we maybe haven't done so much on the risk assessment and not doing the vulnerability scans. I mean, I know I could only check one of these things. I'm very, very small, but nonetheless, right? If you're on the net, you're a potential target. So I just thought that was an interesting contrast.
Thank you for saying that. I didn't know how to say that politely, but like we were all feeling really confident early, and then you go through and show it all these other areas and not so. But yeah, that's just because we find people, again, that goes back to, and we hear it, we see it everywhere and advertised, it's about this castle wall defense and the technology is going to save us. And it's really not. It's the people and understanding what needs to be done. How do you protect it? And I've got to say, we have a great white paper if you guys want it. We can send it out, about how to really change our thinking that Kathy pulled together. It's about really thinking about product safety. And, we always think about really big about product safety and safety programs and everybody's safety first. And we need to start thinking that way about cybersecurity. And it's not an IT thing. It's really about
Julie,
safety and being secure.
Right. Julie, we'll send over your box of chocolates for that. Responding back on the survey. So
yeah, it was a bribe.
Yeah.
I have a question, even though what is the struggle about doing that you guys are facing, and how do I juggle? I heard this, like, all of a sudden appreciate that question about now I have to do FDA blah 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 regulation, and it's confusing. So I hear there's confusion. What are the other big hurdles and challenges you guys are really facing? Anybody that wants to?
You can report for a friend, right? Doesn't have to be your own company, right?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be your own. It can be a friend. Like, I have this person who keeps clicking on that same stupid email.
No, the favorite one is my mom. My mom keeps calling.
I can tell you from our experience at Zateo, the first challenge we had was really understanding which standards we had to be compliant with, and initially that was pretty overwhelming because it looked like, well, we're doing business here and we're doing business there and we're doing, business with the FDA. Oh my God, we got to be compliant with 4 different things. And then the realization came that there's a lot of overlap in these, right? I mean, 60, 70, 80% overlap in them. And so that became a little bit more manageable. And then the next realization, the next struggle was, well, how deep and far do we go into this, right? And it's the same sort of, that's why I made the comment about the quality management system for those participants who are deploying a quality management system. One of the things you learn is that you only deploy it. You deploy it along the path, that meets your needs. You don't overdo it, right? Because you can create an overarching infrastructure that becomes so onerous to try and maintain and so expensive to maintain, and, there's potentially the tendency to overkill it, right? And so there's a lesson in that, just like there is in the quality management system deployment, there is in basically implementing a cybersecurity plan as well. You obviously need to do what you have to do, but you evolve it as your organization evolves, and you want to stay just out in sort of front of the true need to it. So those were the kinds of things that we wrestled with early on. And I can tell you that several years ago, we had an incident. And it was human-based. It was a person made a mistake. They did the wrong thing. And we had a pretty secure system set up. And then we had to deal with essentially a ransomware threat. With a bunch of Russians. This was about 3 or 4 years ago. And that was, it took us, fortunately we had enough backups in place that we were able to, pull out the backups, but it took us 6 months, it's not as seamless as you might think it is, to restore all of that. And it was just an error on the part of an individual, and that didn't have anything to do with the infrastructure we had in place, but somebody made a mistake, with a firewall, and it took literally 60 minutes for the penetration to occur. The window was open for that long,
So it's 1 o'clock, and so we want to honor people's time, and so CyberCompass has some great offers, so I'm going to have them talk about that. And then if anybody wants to stay on later and continue asking questions, we can leave this open for a little bit longer, but let's get to, and if you have to drop, that's okay. We'll send out some information on this, but I wanted them to talk about it real quick.
So I'll take this. So we have a quick offer. We have really what we call a cyber resilience quick check. So you're going to get an email with all this. So we want you to pick what you want to do and not feel like you have to do it. We've also created some, we saw external pen testing, which we saw was interesting. Only 11% have it. We have some great pen testing offers for you guys that you could get it run one time if you want it, but we have a great monthly price that we're going to put out to BioAustin for being a member. And we're also including with the pen test, the cyber awareness training. And it's not just a training, it's a whole learning management system. So you can see exactly, you know, who's competency and tracking, which is what you need to meet your compliance regulations. So that's also included in that. Here's a little bit about them. We have a one time at $1,000, but you can get a monthly for $2,500, which is a little over $200 a month. If you look at it that way, and we have all the awareness training for 100 employees up to it free. We're going to include that. Again, it's all in our cyber tool, so it's easy for you to manage and take care of. So next slide, we'll show you that our training has like over 15 modules and addresses both remote and on-site. So I just want to let you know you may have it, but this could supplement it and add what you already have. But it also will cover a lot of the remote issues that we find a lot of people don't have training for. So that's the value we want to give back to you guys. And again, you're going to get an email. It's going to have a link to the cyber quick check. That's free. Take it. You get a report that's really nice to start showing your vulnerabilities. And we'll have information if you want to take advantage of our member discounts that we're offering today. So just be on the lookout from that. So.
Thank you, Kathleen. I was going to offer one last piece of advice to everyone, because this is one of these interesting things. You ask most people, what's the #1 thing to do in cybersecurity? And they'll give you all kinds of answers. I need antivirus, I need this, I need that, whatever, firewall, blah, blah, blah. The #1 thing out of all the frameworks to do first is to ensure you have proper functioning restorable backups. And people are like, that has nothing to do with cybersecurity. And you're like, sure it does. Cybersecurity is about cyber resilience. How do you keep the business running? Well, you're not going to keep the business running if you can't restore your data after a breach or after anything that happens that destroys it. And the one point to write down and make sure you're doing this is you need to have backups that are pulled from your systems, because if you don't pull them, ransomware can infect them. So you actually have to pull them from the systems. So they can be backed up locally, but then there's got to be some kind of cloud or offsite storage. You got to do something that when you pull them off, you can verify that they're valid and they have not been corrupted yet. So that's my tip of the day in cybersecurity. It has, you know, and most people will say that has nothing to do with cybersecurity, but it is the most important thing for cyber resilience is, can I restore effectively and fairly rapidly? And as you can mention, Timothy and their company were doing the right thing. The problem was the way it all happened, it just took time to get it all recovered and found everything, right? Pulled it all back together. So testing your backups is important. Testing means taking a raw system and restoring it. Yeah, incident response plan.
Everybody needs one. Everybody has a disaster recovery plan. Have an incident response plan.
Yep. So I know we're over, but if you get, well, hang on a minute.
So want to thank everybody for attending. Thank you again. Robert, you can email Robert F@cybercompass.io. Happy for any questions. Look for some emails from us we have a handout for all this stuff, as well as how you can get to links. And we appreciate your time and your thoughts today. Have a great one.
Thank you.
Stay cyber resilient.